In my previous video, I got my whole parallel four-link suspension system together, and we also saw that there's still a lot of sideways movement. So in this video, I'm going to build a Watts link to solve that problem. And then, I still have to do airbag mounting brackets as well. But I first want to get this diff to stay nicely in the center through the Watts link before I do that. So let's explore the whole Watts link scenario, look at the important design criteria, and then I can build the whole thing from scratch. Coming up. Hey, how's it, you oaks, and welcome back. If you don't know me, my name is Duff. I run a small one-man workshop out here in the middle of a forest down in South Africa, and I mostly mess around with rusty old trucks. If you've not been following the build so far, I've got a 1939 Hudson big boy cab here. Down here we've got a Isuzu frame that's been extensively modified. Busy with air ride setups and four links and all the rest of it. I'm running a 351 Cleveland engine coupled to a C4 automatic transmission. So let's dive straight into a little bit of suspension geometry. With this model I built quite some time ago. It's a little dusty, but it should do well enough to explain the principles. You can see my four-link setup, the orangey bits. I've got my parallel bars, top and bottom, same length. This black part here represents the frame, and this black one here, that represents my rear axle or my differential. So if we look at my contraption straight from the back, that's what we see. You can have a bit of movement like this. The range will be bigger if you've got hind joints. But the big problem at the moment is sideways movement. Look at this. Again, if you have hind joints here, you will have more sideways movement than if you have poly bushings. But still, we've got sideways movement. We definitely don't want that. So we need to look at ways in which to solve this problem. And now basically two methods. So the first solution is a pan-out bar represented by these green bits. So without diving too much into the geometry of this one, the best setup for this scenario is if your pan-out bar is parallel to your back axle at ride height. And now, because of this, we've got absolutely no sideways movement. We can still move like this, but that's okay. But sideways movement is completely limited. What does happen here though, and if you look carefully, you'll see that as we go through this travel range, can you see that the back axle is moving sideways? This happens because we're working through an arc. So as the arc moves up, the diff goes off to the side. Same if we go that way. So this solution is great for cars with a fixed ride height and limited suspension travel, but on air ride, where we've got a long range of travel, I don't particularly like the setup, so that's not what I'm going to use, although it's a lot simpler to build. With the air ride suspension, for me it's important that I can pick whatever ride height I want, and my back axle or differential stays in the same spot. So this is not the solution I want. The second solution is the Watts link, and its components are represented here by the silver bits. It's a little bit more involved than a pan-out bar because we have more components. We have two link bars of equal length, and we've got the central bell crank that swivels around a central point right there. But it works very well for keeping this back axle in the middle throughout the travel range. As you can see here, no sideways movement. You can still have a little bit of that movement, but no sideways movement. And what I like about it is no matter at what position we sit, we remain central or in the middle with our back axle. With bad design, you can get a position up here. Look at that, where the thing collapses. And now we've got the back axle that's starting to move sideways. But if we design it properly, that will never happen. Oops. The important design criteria on this one, the two link bars must be exactly the same length. For optimum geometry, the link bars should be parallel to the back axle at typical ride height and not necessarily at half travel like some says. I mean, in my situation with the air ride, my half travel position is not at all where my ride height will be. Next one, a typical ride height, the bell crank must be slightly tilted like we see here to form this Z or Z. Again, that will ensure optimum geometry, and we might even make a drawing later to explain that a little bit better. The length of the bell crank is not that important. I would say anything between 6 to 12 inches. A practical consideration is that it actually does not stick past the bottom of the differential to catch on road debris or something like that. So that length, I would say, needs to be just shorter than the diameter of the differential in this position. And our final point, this swivel point needs to be on the center line of the differential and obviously in the middle as well. See, if you look at this business from the side, you will see that the angle here changes depending on where we go. That's because the diff is moving through an arc, so it means we have to use heim joints here and also on the other side of the link bars to allow for that movement. So there is one other solution for preventing the sideways movement on a parallel 4-link suspension setup, and that would be to stick in a diagonal link like this to triangulate it. And of course now, because it's triangulated, we can't have that sideways movement anymore. This setup's not going to work for my application, but I just thought I'd mention it as another way to prevent sideways axle movement. And then finally, you could advance to a triangulated 4-link. Now we're moving away from parallel 4-links, and a triangulated 4-link means that this link will attach there, and this one there. So we triangulate it from two directions, also done to prevent sideways movement of the axle. But we're talking about parallel 4-link systems, so we're not going to dig deep into this scenario. Hey, enough theory. Let's start building a Watts link from scratch. By the way, that background noise is the rain on my tin roof. It started raining again. So I reckon the first thing I want to do is to create this central swivel point for my vertical bell crank. That needs to swivel like this. So we would need to create an attachment point here for this bolt and maybe a bush or something. So a typical method that I see is guys would weld on a bracket here and here, and then make a boltable support piece that runs across that will contain that bush. You want to be able to take it off if you ever have to undo the cover here. So the rear axle I've got here, it's got these massive flanges here. This comes out of the Holden HQ, or as it was branded in South Africa as Chevrolet El Camino. So looking at this, I would imagine they used the same differential in applications that had a triangulated 4-link, and this must have been where the diagonal links could attach. So I'm going to actually use these massive flanges for bolting on my bracket that will take the central pivot point. So I drilled and tapped here for two M10 bolts. It's about the same as 3/8 bolt. And then I made up this little flange. Can now bolt in there, like that. I've used some 1/4 inch plate, 6mm plate. Now the plan is to weld on a piece of flat bar that will come out this way. I'll do the same on the other side, and then I can make a bracket that runs across like this. And then we can have the bush in here for that pivot point. Like so. So I've used 2 pieces of 50 by 6, 2 by 1/4 inch flat bar. Tacked them on there. I had to mess around for a little bit to get these angles just right. But now I've got them sitting quite nicely. And then I've marked the center line, or the center point, right here. I did that by measuring from this flange. And to make sure, and then I made a mark here, making sure that these 2 distances are the same from each side. So I could establish that line. And then this line here, that represents the center line through the axle. And next I made up this template. So I will have a steel piece exactly to that shape. I drilled a hole in here so I could pick up that point. So I can now go and make this in steel. I think I'll make 2 of them. And the bush can weld in through and between the 2. Right, let's see if my hole is anywhere near the mark. Just gonna hold this in place and have a peek in there. Just, I've impressed myself, freaking hell. Needs to move up just a millimeter or 2. Just gonna take off a little bit here and here. And then it will be spot on the money. So I've made 2 of them and I've clamped them together. So I can just quickly transfer this hole to the other one as well. I think I will just grind them a little bit so they're the same before I take the clamps off. You'll see that I've left this one longer. Let me go show you why I'm doing that. Okay, the flat bar just like this will be quite flexible. So my idea is to stiffen it up by providing a flange, something like that. Cut it at an angle and tie it in there. And then here's my 2 curved pieces. So the one right at the end will sit something like that, and then it can tie into that piece of flat bar there. Something to that effect. We'll see how it works out. So I ended up just stacking my 2 pieces together. So I can just grind it a little bit and make it all nice. So before I break the tacks and take these 2 pieces apart, let's think about the bush that needs to go in here, because then I can roll that hole in one go. Hey, just looking at it, we might do a few speed holes as well. That will look cool. So I scratched here through my boxes and I found these 2 polyurethane bushes. So maybe I could use them. So now if I can find a piece of pipe with the same ID as that, it'll be awesome. Hey, lucky me, look at this. I just cleaned it up a little bit. And my bushes fits in nicely there. Slightly loose, but by the time I've compressed the rubber, I think we'll be fine. So next for me then is to see if I can find a piece of pipe that will fit in there. Hey, look at this, it's a good day for me. I found this bit of heavy wall tubing. I could drill out the inside to fit this M16 bolt. That's about the same as 5/8. And the outside was just a little bit too big, so I turned that down as well, and I've got a nice fit in my bushing. Awesome. So this bush measures 38 millimeters, 1.5 inches. So that would be the size I need to drill. So the idea now is to stick this bush through that hole. Same here. Assemble it something like that. And then I can weld the bush to this plate and to this plate. I made up these wooden pieces to represent my bell crank. I just want to do mock-up to see how it all works before I weld things together. So my buddy says it's not a bell crank, but of course it is. If we pivot it there, okay, most bell cranks works through 90 degrees. This one goes through 180, but if I push here, I pull there. So I am changing the direction of motion, and that is exactly what a bell crank does. So I will call it a bell crank. So before I assemble it, let me just go show you how I establish the length of my bell crank, or then the distance between these two pivot points. So I measured the width of the center part of my differential by clamping these two squares together, and then I made my bell crank just a little bit shorter, the total length, so that when it sits here, that's the swivel point, the bottom end doesn't protrude past the edge here. I don't think that's a good idea. It might catch onto some road debris or something like that. So effectively my bell crank, the overall length is just a little bit less than this distance. So center to center here, it works out to 205 millimeters, a tad more than 8 inches. And now the idea is to do this. Let me just assemble it quickly. One on that side, one on this side, and then my heim joint will go in here, and then my link bar can attach there, and the other one up here, and then the whole thing can swivel like that. So my mock-up is assembled now. But I'm starting to get worried here, because I don't think this business is going to work. Oh no, too clever for his own good he is. This link bar is going to fail right there on the bracket. John, this business is not going to work. Well, that's what happens if you do organic design. I'm going to have to go back to my non-existent drawing board, because this is not going to work. That will definitely fall right there. Damn! So I've heard it said that one of the big differences between a bad craftsman and a good craftsman is that the good craftsman just knows more tricks for hiding his mistakes. So let's see what we can do to hide this mistake, or to recover from this mistake. So here's what I did to reclaim my original piece, which had a hole here that was way too big. I quickly made this bush that I welded in here. So that worked out quite well, and now I've got some extra material. And then I also added a piece of flat bar here to stiffen up the whole thing. Yeah, if we didn't know better, we could say that I planned it like this from the beginning. I made the bell crank from two pieces of 50 by 6 flat bar, 2 inch by 1/4 inch. The distance between centers is the same as my mock-up piece here. What was it, 205 millimeters, or just a little bit more than 8 inches. And my bush will now go in here. Something to that effect. It's a little tight, but it goes in like that. And then I'll weld it in place. Then this 16 millimeter high tensile bolt will go through like that. That's 5/8 for my mates in the States. My bell crank will slide across onto that. Now it can swivel like this. Let me go show you on the truck, then you'll understand it better. So I just clamped my contraption on here to see if it's all going to work and make sure this can rotate now like that. And there's no chance anymore of that link catching on anything. So that's good. I'm going to have to provide it with another bracket here to help support this bolt. It's not going to be strong enough as it is. Yeah, it would probably be a lot easier to just do that sort of more standard thing. Comes across like this. I guess that's the price you pay for trying to get clever and fancy. Oh, look at this back axle there. It's rusting so quickly. I mean, not too long ago it was all grey and silver and bare metal, and now it's already starting to rust. I've tacked on my fandangled piece after checking that everything is square and center and good. And I'm going to add this piece of flat bar to give this whole business some more structure. I'm just using an off-cut piece of sheet metal and some clamps to hold it in place for me. Works really well. I think I'm going to fill this piece in here just for the aesthetics. Right, I think there's enough welding to hold it together. I'm going to take it off and finish it up on the bench. I spent some time with the welder and the grinders to sculpt my fandangled bracket. Now we better go see if it still fits. Awesome, it fits. Not your typical setup, but I think that looks pretty damn cool. So now my bell crank will sit right there. It can swivel nicely. So next up for me is to now start thinking about my link bars. Now I have to extend this frame downwards to provide a fastening point. Same here. But I'm not going to worry about that right now. Now what I got to do is to figure out the length of these link bars. And I think for that we need to go to the forest engineering design office so we can make some drawings. So I'm just parking off here in my thinking chair for a while to contemplate the next stage of my watch link design. Hey, but I reckon I need to refresh my remaining few brain cells before I get into that kind of geometry. I mean, after all, I already screwed up once today. So I reckon I'm going to take the rest of the day off. Not going to do that with pay like my buddy Radrod Bob. I mean, my boss can't afford it. So as always, I would like to thank you for hanging out with me out here in my forest workshop and keeping me company. I enjoy that. I will see you in the next video when we conclude the watch link build on my Hudson Rat truck. Until then, have a lucky one.